morning when I spoke very briefly to say a few words about Spru, and Jeremy, our director, Jeremy Hall, our director, is going to give a full introduction to Spru. Bipashi, the housekeeping rules, if you could share them yourself, sorry, because I wasn't part of the workshop yesterday, and I'm here really to be a sort of face of Spru partly, and the organisational sort of side of Spru, because that's my role to really support all of the academic work in an operational kind of way, and it's really interesting for me to learn more about DST and the Centres for Policy Research, and how your organisation relates to our organisation. So those are my kind of interests. But Bipashi, can I ask you to just repeat the housekeeping rules before we proceed?
I'll do that.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Sorry about that. So yeah, it's very simple. Some very practicalities before we move on to the speeches, to the speech by Jeremy. So yeah, please, as all of you are already, please keep your microphones muted especially when there is presentations and when you're not speaking. And please do switch off, which you are already also doing. Please keep your cameras off because during the presentations it might affect the bandwidth, but please do turn on your cameras when you are speaking or when you are asking a question or commenting, so that we also know, it's always good to associate faces and know the faces. So that's the second thing. The third thing is that if you have any technical issues, please contact Francisco Dominguez, who is in the call. So if you have any issues or if you have any questions around the technicalities around Zoom, and later on we will also do a breakout group activity. So if you have any questions, you can ask Francisco in a direct message, and he will try to respond to you. And also the final point is that this meeting, this workshop, is being recorded. So if you have any, if you don't have consent for recording, please let us know. We can stop recording, but ideally we want to record, because it's also something that we want to look back into. So this workshop, these plenary sessions and the flash talks and Jeremy's presentation will be recorded, including your questions and comments after the presentations and the open floor discussion. But the breakout room sessions will not be recorded. So that is your opportunity to discuss something if you don't want to be recorded. Yeah, that's all for practicalities.
Thanks so much, Bipashi. You did that so much better than I could have stumbled over it after all your practice. So I'm just about to hand over to Jeremy to give an introduction to Spru and a welcome to the second day. And that will be for the next, well, it looks like 7 minutes now, 7 or 8 minutes, before we go into the third plenary of the workshop, the STI policy in the Global South, with presentations by Spru's very own Adrian Ely on STI policy for development in Spru past and present, and Professor Angela Gurdu on data governance and equity, an Indian perspective, followed by an open floor discussion. So without further ado, I shall hand over to our Spru director, Professor Jeremy Hall. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. Thanks, Bipashi. Thanks, everybody, for organizing this. I think this is a fantastic opportunity. Can you see my screen? Great. So welcome to Spru, everybody. We've been in business now for 55 years. In the interest of time, I'll go through these slides quite quickly just to give you a background of what we do here at Spru. So we are currently in the University of Sussex Business School, but at the same time, we have very long roots. So the university was founded in 1961. Spru in the Department of Economics was founded in 1966. The University of Sussex Business School was 2009. And today we're part of a group of departments within the business school. As probably most of you know, Spru was founded by Chris Freeman in 1966. He was one of the early pioneers of innovation studies and also one of the first to advocate for interdisciplinary, problem-focused, and empirically based research on science and technology policy, as well as innovation management. He actually created research and innovation indicators such as R&D expenditures, patents, those sorts of things that we now commonly use throughout the world, as well as accountability of publicly funded research funding. We've done a number of many really interesting projects over the years. One of them was Project Sappho, which was a study that compared successes and failures of innovation within companies. This later became the foundation for innovation policy and technology management, plus the early capabilities perspective and strategy. Chris coined the phrase national systems of innovation, which in turn has been heavily influential around the world in terms of policy, but also for regional systems of innovation and international business. Spru's actually had an influence over India as well. And here's a quote from one of your former scientific advisors to Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, Parthasari. He said, in most of the policy innovations in India's science and technology sphere, wherein I was involved, there was a great deal of Chris's influence. So I didn't realize this until recently, but Spru has had enormous impact in almost every country that I've been exposed to. Other projects that Spru has contributed towards over the years: Lean Production, the International Motor Vehicle Program, which is a partnership with MIT. We were the European partners. This is actually something that's been widely diffused around the world. And as an anecdote, I was actually having people from one of our human resource departments at the University of Sussex complaining to me that they were forced to adopt lean production principles in their day-to-day operations, not realizing that it was actually started here at Sussex. We had the world-renowned Harvard Sussex program, which was an interdisciplinary collaboration of informed public policy on chemical and biological weapons. We did pioneering research on technology foresight. This resulted in major programs, including the Dutch Foresight Program and the UK Foresight Program. We've done studies on complex products and services. The Sussex Energy Group, this is currently, I believe, the largest in the world and one of the most productive. One of our colleagues is actually, his work has been retweeted by the likes of Leonardo DiCaprio. And this morning I got an email from him saying that Rebecca Henderson, a professor at Harvard Business School, she's been working there for over 20 years, was really interested in his paper. We've also had the award-winning Spru IDS STEPS Center, which focused on interdisciplinary research driving green transitions. And Johan's contributions and the team for Deep Transition that's here today that looked at deep transitions and sustainability for transformative innovation policy. This is only to name a few. So I've been working now as director of Spru for about 1.5 years, and I'm trying to figure out what makes Spru so successful. And I think our roots trace back to Chris Freeman's approach, which was problem-focused, interdisciplinary, empirical, and critically analyzed research of policy and managerial relevance. At the time, that was quite path-breaking, but the way we're set up is actually true to this actual mission that we have. So although we're primarily a social science institute focused on innovation studies, our faculty have a range of expertise. So we have physicists, engineers, sociologists, psychologists, economics professors, geography, and management. So we actually are truly multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary. And for me, what I thought was quite powerful was that our business model is actually relatively unique, certainly for business schools and for most academic institutions in the UK and elsewhere. So we're primarily driven by granting agencies, where most Spru faculty are hired first on research contracts. So most people get their foot in the door, including me 20 years ago. When I was a PhD student, I worked on projects. And then from here, we're hired basically whether or not we're able to do that particular project and have the capability that's necessary for that project. And then from there, we move on by winning our own grants or get involved in teaching, or we move elsewhere. I call this the Spru research engine. So what this does is it persistently reinforces our mission and allows us to legitimately respond to pressing societal needs. Currently, the one that we're facing right now is the obvious post-pandemic restructuring and the Sustainable Development Goals. It also allows us to engage in pioneering research-informed teaching. So I believe we were one of the first places in the world, if not the first in the world, to offer science and technology policy. We were one of the first to offer innovation management. So we were truly on the cutting edge, but more importantly, our research is heavily shaped by our teaching. And I would also suggest that our teaching is heavily shaped by our research. So it's a two-way street. We learn from our students, but more importantly, what we do, it's from those projects which makes us problem focused, those external grants. This is what I think really drives the system and makes us relevant. This allows us to focus on relevant research with impact. So these are our teaching and research themes. So our research themes are on the left. We do sustainable development, energy policy, innovation and project management, economics of innovation, and science and technology policy. We offer a range of degrees, both on campus, but also online. So this includes MSCs in science and technology policy, sustainable development, energy policy, strategic innovation management, project management. We also have 2 online courses currently that are doing, as you can imagine, very well due to the lockdown. So sustainable development, this MSc course is currently the biggest one we have on campus. And our energy policy course is doing quite well too. We're actually proposing to bring some more on stream in the near future. So currently Spru has just under 80 faculty members, many of which are supported by external grants. So this makes us one of the world's oldest and largest innovation studies institutes. Our current research portfolio is in excess of 18 million. I have great difficulties keeping track of this. Thankfully, we have Marion working here that keeps me up to speed on all these things, but we're constantly getting new grants coming. We're a major contributor to the business school's top 3 ranking in the UK for research income. So that's one of the major indicators for research success, is our ability to win grants. We're the founding institute for a number of journals, including Research Policy, Social Studies of Science, and Industrial and Corporate Change. Plus, we're current home, in addition to Research Policy, Energy Research and Social Science, Journal of Engineering and Technology Management, and the International Journal of Innovation Management. There's few places in the world that can claim to have the editorial presence that Spru has when it comes to innovation studies. We're also quite significant in terms of research outputs. So since 2014, Spru has published, this is now in excess of 800 papers. So our energy group has published, I believe, so far this year, so a month and a half, have published about 50 papers, which is quite remarkable. We have a number of high-ranked journals as well, including the ABS list, which we use in business schools for ranked journals. We have in excess of 50 journals that rank at the very top, plus a number of really solid journals that rank in the middle one, ABS 3s. Our publications, however, are also, in addition to publishing ones in management and economics, we're also hitting the very elite journals in other fields, such as science, nature, nature climate change, nature energy, nature sustainability, nature biotechnology, environmental science and technology. That journal is actually the single biggest journal in engineering, and people in Spru are hitting that. So there's very, very few research institutes, when they claim they do interdisciplinary research, can actually prove that they do it through their publications. And for me, this is quite remarkable. Last thing I wanted to mention on this slide is that we have 3 Spru faculty members that hit the top 1% of most highly cited professors in the world for 2 years in a row. We have another faculty member, Andy Sterling, who's actually got better citations than some of those guys that made the list, and I don't know why he's not on the list. If I was to scratch deeper, I would find probably even more people would hit that list. Here's some fun facts about Spru. Johann Schott, our previous director, he commissioned a study on the history, the academic contributions of Spru, so you can go check it out. It's a fascinating read. A little while ago, the magazine, US-based magazine, business magazine, Forbes, article ranked the top 5 economists now. 2 of them have Spru connections. Research Policy is the only top-ranked innovation journal on the major ranking schemes in the world. So it's the best journal when it comes to innovation studies. Managing Innovation, this is a textbook originally by Keith Pavitt, John Besson, and Joe Tidd. Unfortunately, our friend Keith Pavitt passed away some time ago. It's now Tidd and Besson. This has been the world's best-selling technology innovation management textbook since at least 2000. I mentioned to you before about the Harvard Sussex program. The co-founder, Julian Perry Robinson, who unfortunately passed away from COVID last year, he allegedly turned down a Nobel Peace Prize. The Sussex Energy Group professor I've mentioned before, Benjamin Sovacool, he actually has more citations than 4 of the last 5 recent Nobel Economics Prize winners. So this is the current challenges and opportunities that I suggest that we're facing right now. Maintaining momentum at a time when science policy research is much needed. I can't overemphasize the importance of science policy when it comes to post-pandemic restructuring. This is the key issue that we're facing today. So what we need to do is get through COVID, the pandemic, in one piece, coming out well-positioned to deal with the post-pandemic restructuring in a post-Brexit environment, which in turn for us will have major implications. UK universities are highly dependent on tuition fees. We're also dependent on the maturation of international student markets. So one of the challenges that we're facing is that how do we maintain a high-powered research institution in the UK system? So we need to shift from generic to distinctive research-informed courses. The other thing that we need to really consider is exploiting new online platforms. So this leads me to the reason why I'm so excited about being here today. It calls for international collaborations, and I'm calling this Spru International. And this includes things like tailored executive training. Also, I'm really excited about how we can establish closer ties with TIPSI in India. So, and basically using TIPSI and Spru as a science policy nexus, we have collaborations around the world. And I'm always stunned to find out important, relevant science policy people are almost in every major market in the world. Another thing that I would highly recommend is MSc secondment. So bring your people out here to study with us for a year. I've looked in with my dean whether or not we can offer specialized training. So for example, people come out here in your department could come out here for 6 months and do the coursework, and then they could go home and do their dissertations in situ, where they could focus on a real policy issue that you're grappling with. And honestly, I can't imagine a better way of solving your problems. And one of the things I find absolutely fascinating about Spru is that once you're a Spru, you're always Spru. Around the world, I'm treated much better than I deserve simply because I'm a Spru member. And I have to say, Johan has been former director. He's been absolutely magnificent. Our other directors that are still at Spru, Ben Martin and Gordon McCarran, it's just absolutely amazing, the people from Spru that have been so supportive of what I've been doing. So I'm hoping that we can figure out ways that we can connect and utilize this in a broader sense. Ultimately, our goal is to ensure that where the right research is needed at this time, which I would suggest is highly critical. Well, I think my time's up. I just wanted to leave you with just a thank you and some of the celebratory events that we're planning in the next little while. One of the things, as we all know, that we're grappling with is just how difficult and depressing this last year has been. I'm hoping with the vaccines and the eventual stop of the pandemic that we'll actually be able to have a really truly exciting fall coming up. And I'm hoping you can participate with us at that time. So thank you very much, and I will stop sharing now.
Thank you, Jeremy. We were hoping to invite some questions if you had any about Spru, but we need to move on with time, and I'll hand over to Bipashi. But just to say, please do ask us questions in the chat or through Bipashi by email if you want to know more about Spru, and Jeremy's obviously shared the links for further reading if you're interested in the history, but if you're more interested in the sort of the current organisation, what we're doing and where, there's lots of information on the website, but also do come to us with any questions. Thanks very much. I'll pass on to Bipashi now and enjoy the plenary. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Marian. Thanks, Jeremy. Thank you so much for that brilliant introduction. I think everyone knows about, is more familiar with Spru now, with that very nice sort of overview of our research and teaching and our also challenges and strengths and challenges. So I think I really have to thank you for that very good introduction on the beginning of the second day. So I think let's move on. So we are officially starting the third plenary of this workshop. And the third plenary is about, so yesterday we looked into the history of STI policy, we looked into SDGs, we looked into of course the ongoing sort of debate and discourses around STI policy in India, as well as TIPSI work. But today, I think the main title of the plenary is STI policy in the Global South. And for that, I would invite Dr. Adrian Ellie from Spru to give us an overview of STI policy for development in Spru as it happened in the past, and as we are continuing to engage in STI policy for development in the present from Spru's perspective. So Adrian is a reader at Spru, and he has been in Spru for the last 21 years. So he's a very he's extremely experienced in science, technology, innovation studies, sustainability studies, and he's also a member of the STEP Center, where he co-leads the network around transformative pathways for sustainability as part of STEP Center's global consortium. So welcome, Adrian, and floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Biposhi. So I'm going to share my slides now. I hope you will just indicate whether or not that's working okay.
Yes, you can full screen.
Is that okay?
Perfect.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you, Biposhi. Thank you very much to the organisers for giving me the opportunity to talk to this group. It's really a privilege to do so. I've been given the task of talking about Spru's history. Now, Jeremy's done a very good job of starting on that, but it's 55 years and it's pretty difficult to cover in 15 minutes. So building on what Jeremy's done and neglecting a huge amount of work that we've done in OECD countries, for example, and in specific sectors like energy, ICTs, biotechnology, I'm going to try and focus specifically on science, technology, and innovation policy for developing countries. And I recognize that this is going to be a partial whistle-stop tour, but hopefully one that will put into context some of the discussions of yesterday and the discussions that we'll be having today. Spru was established in 1966, as Jeremy said, and I think it's worth saying that the Institute of Development Studies, also on the Sussex campus, was established in the same year, and we've had a very long history of effective and productive collaboration with colleagues there as part of these international networks that have been pointed to before. Now, the 1960s were an optimistic time, I think, for science and technology. There were people traveling to space. There were efforts to vaccinate the world against polio and infectious diseases. And Spru and IDS at that time, I think, played a really important function as a site where countries from around the world, many of which were newly independent countries, and their representatives could come together and discuss the challenges of how to harness science and technology for development. So there was a very early study seminar series held with Spru and IDS that really brought together these networks for the first time, a long time before we had Zoom and even the information and communication technologies we benefit from now. And as well as these interactions with individual people and countries, Sussex-based academics were in a very good position to engage with the emerging debates in the United Nations in this area, which had started really from the 1963 conference in Geneva. Not long after that, in 1969, colleagues from Sussex.
Adrian, yeah, so I was just going to say that your slides weren't moving until just now.
Okay, thanks, Vipashi. So, colleagues in 1969 were invited by the United Nations, which was developing its capabilities around science technology for development, to write the introductory chapter, or introductory statement to the World Plan of Action for the application of science and technology to development in the second development decade. That was the 1970s. And they did this. This is the list of people who contributed, all Sussex academics, and R.C. Desai, who was allocated the role from the United Nations Secretariat at that point. The document provided a very early analysis of the international division of labor and the state of global science and technology around the world in 1970, and also put forward some quantitative and qualitative recommendations. And because of these recommendations, it earned the name the Sussex Manifesto, because it was making these quite challenging recommendations to the UN and to national governments. Now, the analysis and the recommendations were certainly of their time, but I think that they're really interesting and they actually resonate with some of the debates that we engage with today as well. So what did they come up with? I've got some quotes here from the document, which, as I said, was developed in 1969 and 1970. So quantitative targets about the levels of investment in research and development as a proportion of GDP, or GNP as was more usually used in those days. And they made these recommendations to all developing countries, which is a hugely diverse group, which in those days included obviously India, but also China, South Korea, countries across Latin America and Africa, and Southeast Asia. But they put forward these recommendations. But importantly, I think, more importantly, they pointed to the need for changing institutional structures and institutional change that would ensure that that investment really addressed the challenges that were identified by developing countries themselves and prioritized by developing countries themselves. And without that kind of reform, our colleagues suggested that there was a grave danger that increased expenditure would leak away in a kind of scientific conspicuous consumption. And these challenges of getting the institutions right for delivering on societal challenges remain, problematic and difficult for countries around the world to this very day. And we are continuing to engage with them. There were also some reoccurring themes, which I think which were highlighted back in 1970, but are still important today. Firstly, there was the theme of questioning growth, economic growth, GDP growth as the objective. And our colleagues suggested that actually growth is more of a consequence of development than its essence. So it shouldn't be the overarching policy goal. Development is more than growth, they said. And then lastly, they pointed to the need for indigenous capabilities. They said that the distribution of science and technology capabilities back in 1970, as it was highly skewed towards the advanced economies, was inadequate for development. And they suggested that, amongst other things, the less developed countries must have an indigenous scientific capability, which I think resonates with some of the debates that are happening around the world, including in India today. So this was published, this introductory statement was published actually as an annex to the report I pointed you to before, rather than the introductory statement. It was published in 1970, and it had quite an influence. Around the same time, in Canada, the International Development Research Centre, the IDRC, was being established, and Spru's had a long and productive partnership with IDRC since that time. In fact, the next key research project I want to point towards was funded by IDRC and convened by the former director of Spru, Jeff Oldham, with many other colleagues. So Maximum Halty from the Organization of American States was also a key instigator of the project from the early 1970s. Now, this was really the first large-scale international policy research network on science and technology for development. It took place between 1973 and 1978, and it brought together 10 developing countries to really share their experiences around policy instruments. It was called the Science and Technology Policy Instruments Project, or STEPI, and amongst other countries included contributions from India. Now, there is an enormous amount of documentation and outputs that were put together as part of the STEPI project. One of them, which involved methodology, was written by the field coordinator, Francisco Sagasti, who's gone on to have a long and distinguished career, is currently the president of Peru. And another, which is featured here, is a background paper for one of the meetings. So this was on the planned approach for the growth of electronics industry, a case study of India. And India was involved through the NCST, specifically Anil K. Malhotra and then S.K. Subramanian, who took over in 1975 as those focal points. So Spru's been involved in these international networks, sharing insights and experiences and experiments for many decades. And it's really interesting for us to see how these ideas and also the relationships continue through the years and decades. Now, I mentioned the United Nations before, and Spru's engagement in UN debates. In the late 1970s, the second major UN conference on science and technology development took place in 1979, and this was in Vienna. It led to the Vienna Programme of Action on Science and Technology for Development from 1979 onwards, which included efforts towards strengthening science and technology capacities in developing countries, restructuring the existing pattern of international scientific and technological relations. So power relations recognized within the UN and also within Spru's work, I should say, through these years, and strengthening the role of the United Nations system in the field of science and technology, and the provision of increased financial resources. Now, the financial resources envisaged at this time weren't fully delivered, and the role of the UN, for example, in technology assessment, took off, but only temporarily, so it doesn't continue through till today. But technology assessment, I think, is a really important area which Spru has contributed to. And shortly after 1979, colleagues Jeff Oldham and Rafi Kaplinsky published a paper about emerging technologies and how they could impact on developing countries. It's a really fascinating read. 10 years later, the UN General Assembly reaffirmed the validity of the Vienna Programme of Action and its basic goals, but expressed concern regarding its implementation. But nevertheless, Spru colleagues working with international partners had continued work in this area via colleagues including Norman Clark, Martin Bell, also Keith Pavitt, who's been mentioned earlier, and Pari Patel. Colleagues who, through the techniques and methods that they developed, really helped our analysis of science and technology and how it differs across different countries, developing countries or otherwise. Now, also in the UN, in the late 1990s, we saw the emergence of sustainable development debates, starting from Stockholm earlier, but then Rio, the Rio summit, where these debates really took off. 1992 was also the year when the United Nations Commission on Science and Technology for Development was established, and I'll come back to that. That's with a secretariat hosted by UNCTAD, the UN Conference on Trade and Development. But just on the focus of sustainable development, Spru's work in this area with colleagues in India and other developing countries also turned and mirrored these wider environmental debates through the 80s, 90s and onwards. And most recently, we engaged quite prominently in the Rio+20 summit, from which the SDGs emerged. And much of our work, as you've already heard, links to the SDGs in a number of different sectors. So I can't go into detail, but there have been and there continue to be many individual projects, which I can't name, which have engaged with sectoral issues around food and agriculture, energy, cities infrastructure, digital transformations and ICTs and health. And you've heard some of those from Tipsy colleagues yesterday, but we have many examples which also have collaborated with our colleagues and partners in India. So I mentioned UNCTAD and UN Commission for Science and Technology for Development. We've continued to work with them, and just to highlight a couple of recent papers which have seen important Spru contributions. One on the left here is on new innovation approaches to support the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, which I, along with colleagues in Argentina, contributed to, and also the framework for science, technology and innovation policy reviews, which Johan Scott, who you heard from yesterday, and I contributed to as the academic leads, but with a much wider international network of people who we consulted. So we're continuing to work with UNCTAD. The framework on the right has actually been implemented. This combines work on science, technology for development with the SDGs. It's been implemented through a STIP review in Zambia and in Ethiopia so far, and just reflects these long years of engagement in these international debates. So the title of the talk was Past and Present, and just to highlight some of the ongoing collaborations we have, some of which you're already aware of. The STEP Centre, which Jeremy mentioned, has been going for 15 years now, nearly. That's a collaboration between Spru and other parts of the university, especially the Institute of Development Studies. And the centre is, as Viposhi mentioned, I'm co-leading an international network that brings together colleagues and partners from across 5 different continents. And importantly, within India, we're working closely with the South Asia Sustainability Hub and Knowledge Network and the Transdisciplinary Research Cluster on Sustainability Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. TIPSY, which you've already heard a lot about yesterday, forms an important network of funders and government organizations. So that is in comparison to the network of research organizations that the STEP Centre convenes. And we've also got this large project, STRINGS, Steering Research and Innovation for the Global Goals, which is working with United Nations and again, an international network, this time in India, the Centre for Research on Innovation and Science Policy. And there are countless other initiatives which I can't go into because I know that I've finished my time. Basically, just to say, throughout these years and decades, we're all continuing to learn lessons from each other. And I, along with colleagues at Spru, look forward to ongoing collaborations with partners in India, new and old, and taking forward this long history of co-learning. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Adrian. And that was really fascinating to go through, 40, 50 years of history of Spru, and then also look at the present. Thank you. So we will take questions. So I would request everyone who has a question or a comment to Adrian, please write it in the chat, because we will have an open floor discussion, a Q&A session after the second talk. And I would like to invite Anurag to co-moderate the session with me, because he will introduce our second speaker. Anurag?
Yeah, thanks, Viposhi. Adrian, that was fascinating. I'm sure everyone listening from India, the amount of activities under the Spru umbrella, it's somehow hard to grasp when you're looking at the website. So it's very helpful to see how to contextualize it in the Indian context. So thank you. So my role next is to introduce Professor Anjula Gurdu. She's She's a professor at the Department of Management Studies at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. Also the chairperson for the Center for Society and Policy. Recently, the CPR has co-located with the center, so I'm sure CPR and CSP will be collaborating closely going forward and working with each other. So very excited to have her as part of this workshop. She has many ties to the UK. She has been a fellow at the University of Leeds. She has received grants from the British Council, particularly on UK-India Education and Research Initiative. And then she's a recipient of the Chevening Rolls-Royce Science and Innovation Leadership Fellowship. To her credit, she has more than 40 publications, peer-reviewed publications, and everything in a wide range of topics, particularly microfinance, the informal economy, street entrepreneurship, decentralized welfare institutions, and indirect consequences of environmental legislation, just to name a few of the topics that come under that wide range of topics that she has studied. So with that, I welcome Professor Gurdu to take the stage and to help us learn about her topic.
Okay, thank you so much, Anurag. And I'm really happy to be here to talk about data economics and data policy. Just a quick 2 points. One, of course, what I'm going to talk about is a little different from what is being discussed. I'm going to talk about data economics and data policies that are coming in India from the Indian perspective and also from the perspective of equity. So that's one. And the other is, of course, the fact that I'm going to talk about equity and data and the fact that there's a whole economics associated with it. It's a bit tricky topic as well. But Suyesh had said that, can you give an Indian equity perspective to the whole thing? And I couldn't resist saying, couldn't resist this point. The reason why I'm saying it's tricky is because, if you look at zoom out lens of any policy, you don't know when, for example, I mean, data is the new oil, and if you'll see the companies which are doing very well, they're all in the data sector. Right? You're talking of Amazon, you're talking of Facebook, and so many others that are there. The reason I'm saying this topic of equity and this is tricky because you don't know when the whole issue of, say, an opportunity, like it was in Facebook, so much of networking, talking, and we got to know so many people and we met our old friends, and there was so much of sharing that happened. At what stage it started becoming an issue of security and equity and other things. And similarly, the other thing can happen as well. We really don't know when the concerns that we raise today actually can also lead to actually economic opportunity later for the same people. So in that sense, anyway, I mean, I'll go ahead with my talk and I'm sure there'll be questions and we'll have a discussion around it as well. So I'll just share my screen. Okay. So just put some pointers here for my memory as well, so I forget sometimes, just to ensure that I'm covering all the points. Okay, here goes. Are you able to, is that okay? Can you see the screen?
Yeah, we can see.
Yeah, and I'll move also because I'm not in my usual place and the internet keeps telling me it's unstable all the time. So can you see the shift as well?
Yes.
You see me shifting the slides?
Yes, we can.
Yeah? Okay. So coming to what I'm going to talk about, the title is this, a little different from what the other two when Jeremy and Adrian were talking about. So I'm going to talk of a very specific policies that are coming in India and have a discussion around it from the equity perspective. Just to give you a point of what, give you from the technology angle, what is it that we are talking about? And I have just kind of put them in certain spaces, and I'm also going to give you a basic overview of what are the vision around it. So basically we're looking at, it's happening everywhere, GPS and internet. So there are these sensors and networks which are gathering data, And they're getting turned into applications which basically provide information to the public in terms of traffic congestion, air quality, bus movement, which are the nearby spaces that you may be looking for. So this is one set of applications that are coming in using GPS as well as internet. The other kind of data around data that things are coming in are public infrastructure management as well, again using the same technology. And we're talking in terms of smart street lighting, smart parking, smart building, and management of buildings as well using these particular technology tools. Then the third part is, of course, the individual support that we're getting. I don't know how much it's used in UK and other countries, but India is really going very fast on utility paying bills, utility services, and other things that are coming in, which is very, very individual support. So we're using internet, we're using our phones and using our desktops, etc., to actually pay bills and do a lot of our activity, which is getting recorded somewhere, right? And it's providing, in that sense, an individual support into our individual different various kind of service support. Then the third kind of technology application that's coming in is artificial intelligence, which also goes one step up and also suggests options. For example, if I have booked an appointment for a health checkup and somewhere in WhatsApp, the information has come that I have high cholesterol, then if I'm ordering online a nice rich beef burger, the chances are that there'll be a red alert saying, hey, this is not the food for you. You might as well better order a salad. So it may just end up planning our life as well. It's happening to some extent, and it will happen good or bad a little more, right? So this is the basic technology applications that are coming in with respect to data. There's a set of things that are coming in, which is providing information to the public. There is a set of things which are actually managing public infrastructure as well. And then there is individual support that we have, which is helping us deal with a lot of our day-to-day work. And then there's the last set, which is slowly creeping in as well, which is maybe helping us plan our lives as well. So if I start putting all of this in the data space, what is the space that I'm going to talk about, the laws that are coming in India? This is how it falls into some extent. There is personal data as well as non-personal. I've called it general commons. There's a lot of debate around it, whether can it fall into the commons talk or not. But anyway, for debate purpose, I might as well say commons. But there's non-personal and personal data that is coming in. So as I said, non-personal is infrastructure data that is getting collected in various forms, street lighting, water supply, parking, and things like that. There's non-personal government activity data that is getting recorded as well. What is the police doing, the security actions taken, if there were electricity poles that got repaired, or there were some lines that were put, there are street lights that were put separately, all of that government activity is getting recorded as well. And then there is public activity. If I'm moving somewhere, if I'm constructing a house, if I'm moving around in and around buildings, all of this, if I'm moving my car, say from one location to another. So public activity in general is also getting recorded in some place. So this is one part of data that is coming in. Then there is personal data as well. Of course, things like very private data, like municipal data. If I bought a house, I've bought a car, if I've made payment, say income tax payment and things like that, that's another data that is getting recorded. You also have personal user preferences like water consumption, etc. And then there's general personal data like movement, travel history, the mobile phone photographs that we do, our browsing histories, etc. All this data is actually getting collected in various forms, either through private, public, or government. The thing is that there's multiple aggregators or / owners to this data, right? So that, because for example, I may be so for example, when I'm talking in terms of data that's coming from my mobile phone, the data belongs to me. The data belongs to the application that I have used, and the data also is getting recorded by the mobile phone company. So there are three separate, and if I start storing this data in a cloud, then it's there as well. Okay? So this is the basic data space that I'm talking of. So for a long time, actually, there was actually no specific law in India for data protection. We had the IT Act as well as the IT rules. And also, of course, in the Constitution as well, we have a right to privacy, where a citizen has a right to safeguard the privacy of their own, their family, marriage, education, etc. So this was basically largely the Information Technology Act was governing this particular space. And specifically, basically, it was not for data protection or management. It was more in terms of if there's a breach. Right. So if there's a company which is collecting data, for example, if you go into your mobile phone is an easy example. If you're going there and they're collecting data of your, and it goes and it is used wrongfully, or if there's some breach that happens in any form, then you are liable to get some compensation from the company. And they also said that there's also a section which said that if there's a wrongful use of it, or there's loss or wrongful gain or use of it, then the company will there's a bit of a punishment as well, imprisonment for 3 years or a cash fine, or a fine of say 5 lakh rupees is what it was at one time. Then further, there were also these IT rules. As I said, there was also another IT Act was this, and IT rules said that it was mandatory for companies also to publish online privacy policy and to also obtain consent before disclosing sensitive information. So this was largely gathered around breach, and the whole concept of data protection and management was not very strong till last year when we got the personal data protection bill. So just kind of put it in brief here. So finally, the whole concept of personal data and non-personal data was defined. There's also another law that has come last year, which also talks of non-personal data. Personal data is defined to mean, so basically what this particular bill did is it regulates personal data related to individuals. It talks of processing, collecting, storing data. It defines the ownership of who owns this data. There's this thing called data principle. It is an individual whose personal data is being processed. So it defined this whole concept of ownership, saying whoever's data is being used, personal data, that is the data principle, and the owner, primary owner of that data. It also defined that entity or individual who decides to use this data, process the data in some form. And so what it did was it gave some rights to the data principal who owns the data and whose data it is, in that sense, ownership and rights. And it also sort of gave some obligations to the entity or individual who was going to process the data. And then it put some certain conditions of transparency, accountability, and things like that, security safeguards, etc. So, so this happened about 2 years back. And then what India has done is it has come up with a regulatory framework for non-personal data. Here they have again defined non-personal data when the data is not personal or it does not fall within the definition of personal that was given in the first bill. Now what they do in this particular framework, which is now moving forward slowly, there's been a second public review as well and public hearing as well, just happened about a month back. So what this one does is it clearly defines what is that non-personal data which actually can be used. So when we are talking in terms of processing and we are talking in terms of economics, right, buying and selling of data as well, right? It's using data in some form, either in terms of application of some kind or research study, for example. Then what this particular regulatory framework gives you the boundaries as to how we're going to operate around it. It talks of public non-personal data, which says generated by the government, like land records, public health, vehicle registration data, etc. It talks of private non-personal data, which is basically a lot of data that is inferred or derived, right? So if there is a certain kind of data which is personal to me, 10 people from say this city, 10 people from this household together aggregated, that is private but non-personal data, right? It also talks of new data that gets created. Say if there are floods and there is a surveillance that's going on, there's a drone that is taken around to collect, to see what is happening, all of that will fall into non-personal data. Right? And what it did was, it's critical and interesting to see is that it also defined something called community non-personal data. So all the user information that is collected by government as well as private entities like the telecom companies, the e-commerce, it all falls under community non-personal data and is open for economic exchange. Right? So it is all anonymized personal data, basically. It includes that. It also includes natural things like social artifacts like houses, forests, floods. As I said, if you're taking a drone around an area, that data comes under, in a village or in a city or a locality, that becomes community non-personal data. Now, it also says that raw or factual data of public as well as private non-personal data also falls under community non-personal. And the focus here was that the importance of anonymization or to prevent risk of re-identification is the focus of this particular framework. And the second part is, how is it that this data will be shared and what kind of economics can revolve around it? So in brief, this is what it does, what it defines 4 entities. It says data principal, which is the natural person to whom the personal data belongs, which is then aggregated and anonymized. Then it says there's a data custodian, which is again the data fiduciary, about saying the personal thing, but here they're calling it data custodian, who undertakes the collection, storage, and processing of this data. And it could be a company, it could basically be any entity who's collecting and storing and processing this data. It could be an online platform as well. And then it says there is going to be a data trustee. Now, who can be a data trustee? Data trustee could just be an NGO, for example. Anybody, so the data principal will, the owner of the data, suppose it's my aggregated data of this household, for example. I can exercise my right through a data trustee, which could be either the government or anybody who can show that they can, or it could be an NGO, it could be a private company, anybody who can take the ownership of that data to help me make it into an economic transaction. So the law clearly says that, in fact, for example, the ownership is defined loosely as a set of primary economic rights. Right? So the data is not defined in that sense in terms of security, but more in terms of economic, or privacy, but more in terms of economic right. And data trustee is the one which will take that economics forward. And of course, it also talks of a data trust where all this data will be collected. The idea of data trust is that there should not be one entity which works with data custodian to process the data and hides the data. The idea is that all the data in some form or the other will be available to the public. So any data that the data custodian has to be stored in data trust. And this could be government, most probably large institutions, it could be associations, it could be any kind of associations as well. It could be the government, it could be any of them who take the ownership of that, the set of data, all the data possible. Right? So this is how it defines the lot of loose ends, of course, and it clearly says, the law clearly, or the framework clearly says we're going to define these things further. So there's going to be a regulatory body which is going to come up soon, and those kind of things will fall into place. So the other part of this particular law that has come of non-personal data, I said, which is the data business part. So this law clearly puts in structures for data business. Business that collects, it defines what it will be. It also talks of how there's going to be a regulator who's going to monitor the economic exchange. Right? So it puts
Professor
the
Gurdu,
whole set of...
I'm sorry, I have to do the horrible job of interrupting you, and we need to wrap up in like 2 minutes, if possible, 2-3 minutes.
Okay, done. Okay. So given that, okay, done. 3 minutes then. Okay. So given that, what are coming in? So what I'll do is I'll not focus on the natural digital access and the great technology divide that comes in. If we are talking of equity, what is it that we talk? We know that there's going to be digital access and the whole issue of access, of participation, security that's going to come in. The larger equity issue that's coming in because of the regulatory push of the economics part of it is who's going to derive this economic benefit? The whole issue of participation. There are elderly, there are people who don't know how to use technology, there are people who don't want to use technology, and there are people who don't want to share data. They don't want their data. There's a whole issue of privacy that is there. Now, given all of that, this whole law which is turning towards economic benefit, who is going to who will participate and what will happen to it is the issue that's coming in strongly of equity. As I said, this is a little tricky of say, when you talk of equity, because you don't know when the whole whole issue becomes from equity to economic opportunity to issue of privacy and equity that we see in Facebook, the other way around, right? So given that, I said this is one of the dilemmas that is there in this whole situation, because the law is clearly protecting the data, the principle, and saying that you can go in for an economic exchange. So now, is there a way out to all of this? Possibly, yes. So how do you bridge the divide? This, I think, is my last slide. How do you bridge this divide? So one of the ways that people are saying, because we're giving it an economic push, is can we move from technocentric to citizen-centric use, right? Can I start by saying, not saying this data, say data on electricity versus water versus this, rather, can I do it the other way around and say, what information will the elderly need? What information will the student need? What information, say, for example, a domestic worker will need, right? House help will need. Is it that we need to make a platform so that they can log in, or we need to make a platform so that they can use it to for their advantage? So this is this whole debate that is going on. Is there a way to turn it to ensure that there's equity and parity by starting from bottoms up? The other thing that that is possible here is that, I don't know how it will get, I've been thinking about it a little more, but can we sort of split, say, necessity driven and luxury driven, kind of two layers to this whole data economics, okay? Where we put the necessary conditions to be met, the government and the private. We have seen it in the airline sector, where there are these necessary routes and there are these routes which actually are very profitable. Can we sort of do something similar for the data economics as well, for this whole data, to ensure that there's equity? People who can't afford also have equal access. Then, of course, there's this whole thing of social networks. And whenever new systems come in, there's always the uniformity of introduction is never equal, but it diffuses. But the social networks, the best way to diffuse it is through social networks. So people are also talking of using community informatics, where you were saying it's a different approach, where you focus on the issue of use rather than access, which I had said the first point, where you start operating from what is it that they want and how can they therefore use it. And slowly then you ensure that there is parity, there's equity, there is everything from the digital divide that is there, technology, to the knowledge divide, to the participation access, all of it is met equally and properly. So I think I'll stop here. Yeah, and yeah, open for questions. I know it's a little different from the earlier talks, but I hope it was clear as to what I was saying. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you. This is a really important topic right now, and thank you for enlightening us on some of the key issues that I guess all of us should be thinking about. And we really appreciate you joining. I know you're on travel, and to be able to take the time. Thank you very much. There are some questions for you in the chat, and I'll ask Vipashi to ask the first question.
Sure. Thanks, Professor Gurdu. I think that was fantastic. That was very illuminating for me, at least. So the first question was from Mamta, and she is asking that what are your perspectives on the data sharing policy, which is what you agree to when you install apps, and whether companies take advantage and share it with further stakeholders. What can you say about the kind of unjustified aspect to that data sharing that happens? Thanks.
Should I respond to it, the first question?
Sure, yeah.
So I totally understand where this question is coming from, Mamta. I can totally understand, because there are two very, very diverse perspectives, frankly. So when you look at this data sharing policy that you agree to when you're using an app, there's so the government stand here is saying that that's inevitable. That's inevitable. There's no way that we can actually stop that. And so therefore, let's convert it into a benefit for the person who's sharing the data. So government has taken that perspective. Okay? Saying that, no, this is inevitable, this will happen, apps are there, they make our life easy, and there's this whole technology that's going to take that direction. So we might as well ensure that there is equity and sharing and application and economic benefit for all. Now, the other side of it, which is the traditional thinking, is saying that there is huge amount of issue of access, privacy, etc. And therefore, this should not be done, right? Just because I'm using an app, I'm paying for that app as well. I mean, if I'm downloading, there's some economic activity that is happening. Suppose I download the banking app, there is an economic activity that's happening. So bank is making the money in some way. Why do they need to now use this data as well? That's additional, actually, frankly, that's additional revenue for them. So why should they be using it? But so that perspective also exists, but currently what's happening in India, and as I understand worldwide, not worldwide, I wouldn't say, I know Japan is not following it, but the push is there to follow it, is to sort of let it be. It's out there, it's going to happen. You might as well try and see what best you can do out of it. So my understanding is that is where this whole thing is going right now. And companies do take undue. I mean, it's additional revenue for them, by the way, the data that they're collecting for you. It is additional. It's not part of just that. They sell it, they use it in some form. There are different things that they do with it, and they do make additional money.
So I'll ask the next question for Adrian. Adrian, you've been engaging on chat. I guess I would be curious to hear, you mentioned the Sussex Manifesto, but there's a new version of it out. And I'm curious if you can just inform us about what prompted writing the new version. And you mentioned there has been a lot of engagement with multilateral agencies, the UNCTAD, and also with governments. So in terms of the ideas that Spru tries to disseminate, if you have any thoughts on what works in terms of getting some of these ideas out there, because the Sussex Manifesto was so progressive, but even now we don't have some of these ideas implemented. So curious to hear what Spru has learned, if you have any thoughts from years of engaging with various levels of policymaking bodies. That's a big question, but yeah,
that's great. It's a great question. Thank you. And I'm really glad that you pointed to the new manifesto, because I wanted to cover it, but I didn't really have time. This is just an example of an opportunity that we took. This was within the STEP Centre, to look at the 40 years that followed the original Sussex Manifesto, and just reflect on how debates had changed and what kind of new manifesto would be required if we were going to focus on not just the older development objectives, but also especially poverty alleviation, social justice, and environmental sustainability. So that new manifesto was produced in 2010 on the basis of a much broader range of discussion with colleagues in about 20 round tables around the world. We had a particularly informative event in New Delhi where we shared an initial draft of that document and had some robust responses. There was also a 40-year anniversary project reflecting on the STEPI research and how that had evolved. And that was really led by Francisco Sagasti, and trying to bring in the next generation of science, technology, and innovation policy scholars from developing countries. So thank you for mentioning that. You can find out more about that new manifesto project, which is now actually 11 years old, not that new anymore, at anewmanifesto.org. In your second question regarding policy engagement, I think this is a big question. And I think this, I guess, is another dimension to the work that Spru does, which regards the interplay between evidence and politics, and how both of those together lead to policy change. A naive assumption would be that excellent science and technology policy research gets published and policymakers and politicians read it and then implement it. But I think all of us that work in this area know that that's far from the truth. Working with international organizations, is presents similar challenges, but the diversity of viewpoints represented by member states, individual countries, makes it even more challenging, I would say, to some extent. Jeff Oldham, who was one of the colleagues who wrote the original Sussex Manifesto, often used to say that it usually took about 10 years between the time when the ideas were introduced in the scholarship within Spru and the time when they were actually implemented within UN circles. So there is a lag. That was a long time ago though, and things keep changing. I think what I'd point to is the importance of open publication, of evidence-based recommendations, a willingness for scrutiny, openness to scrutiny, and then ongoing interaction and relationships across academic and research partnerships, but also with policymakers, civil servants, and indeed ministers or other politicians where that is possible. But it's difficult to identify a recipe if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Adrian. Anshul, I had so following up on Adrian's point, I guess I will ask that regarding this IT Act and Personal Data Protection Bill, we can take two questions together. So Pipashi, you can follow up afterwards. This idea of how the policy gets constructed, I find that in the Indian polity, there's very little, I guess there was a huge blow up about WhatsApp, but generally people are very open about sharing a lot of information. This also came up initially, like all my like Aadhaar card and everything is being shared over WhatsApp, and like it's all over the place after, like it's just like even the passing of these bills seems progressive to me in some sense. I know there's like all these issues with what they're doing with the data, but like just the fact that even the Parliament addressed some of these questions. So yeah, I'm curious. I would be curious to hear about some of the, if you have any thoughts on what kind of pushed the passing of this bill, or even like people who are here, how they can kind of engage in some of these processes. If you have any thoughts on that, that would be great.
Well, let me add the question. So because we, in the interest of time, we have to. So this would be a kind of a wrapping up of the session, I guess, with your comment. So so there was a clarification question in the chat about the definition of personal data that you very nicely sort of explained, and whether it allows identification of specific individuals, because you know, so for example, the definition seems a bit ambiguous in terms of, okay, market research can characterize groups with specific traits as personal data. So I guess the question is more about the anonymity of personal data. I guess that's the question was intending to. And I also want you to maybe wrap up with this, with a final comment on a very broad topic, which I was wondering as I was listening to you, and that is about the role of STI policy, the new policy that India has come up with. So what can you say about the role of STI policy for the data governance? Thanks.
And so quickly, I know there's very little time, so I'll quickly take the first question, the second one, and then the first, and then the last. So this whole thing of personal data, and is it only to do with identification? They're very valid questions. Actually, all of us are also engaging with the government over these. And it is true that personal data there is a mismatch in the two policies and frameworks, that the bill and the framework that has come. So there is an understanding of what personal data is, which is clear that it is data that is specific to me. But the moment the economics of this personal data comes in, then they say anything that can be anonymized. So it is a bit of a tricky thing. And can it be, does it need, so therefore coming to the next question, the first one that was asked, that therefore, is there a possibility and a need to engage with the government? Yes. And so I've had a lot of talk with the government and people who are working around this. The fact is that they also don't know. They are also trying to figure out these questions that are coming in. They also, and one of the reasons why these laws, which look kind of half done are put to the public is because these are tricky things which they also don't have answers to. Very clear understanding of what should be. So definitely, as I said, I'm engaging with the government a lot over it, and there is a need for other people to come in and help out in discussions and deliberating on some of these issues. The whole concept of what is personal data. And as I said, to repeat myself, that there is this very clear definition, but the moment it becomes an economics part of it, then I think it's only, as long as there's no identification, it's fine. But the reality is, anything right now, the technology is such, anything can be re-identified, by the way. Anything can be. I mean, if you talk to, to some of the professors from the IT, from data science, they will tell you, you give me any encrypted, any kind of data, I will turn it and show you. I'll turn it non-personal data in any technology, however strict the technologies, I'll turn it the other way and get you the personal data out. It's possible. So I said, yes, so therefore going to the second, now repeating myself and saying that, yes, there's a huge need to engage with the government over this. There is need to have discussions and engage. Now coming to the STI policy that you were talking of, so the push that STI, and just telling you in general, the push for the policy is collaboration, right? The idea of what I understood about, I mean, just giving you a larger perspective of when they're looking at these various themes, various sub-themes, they're looking for people to engage with themselves, to collaborate a lot, to remove the silos that are. So silos of subjects, silos of institutions, all these silos need to go, and that's one push. The other push that is that you need to go to the user. Why pure? Of course, there's a whole debate saying that pure sciences, a lot of discoveries, a lot of things have come because there was uninterrupted supply of money and resources. So, and you didn't have that push to sort of to go to the user or make it useful to the society and all of that. So that is the other argument where you need to have, you know, that space to do what you want, because a lot of discoveries come from there, inventions come from there. But this policy also taking the other stand, saying that no, you need to engage with the user and see what's useful to the user, and then work towards improving the system. So these are the two things that I see in largely what this new policy is trying to do.
Thank you. Thanks, Professor Gurdu, and thanks, Adrian, for this very fascinating plenary. At least I learned a lot, and I'm sure it was very engaging for everyone. And we have to end the plenary for the interest of time, but I would also request you to continue the conversation in the chat, because there are quite a few questions which we could not get to because of time issues. So thank you again, and I will hand it over to Suresh for moderating the Flash Talks.
Thank you very much, Bipasha, and I also join Anurag and Bipasha in thanking both the speakers for really fascinating insights on these very important areas of STI policy research in general and issues that affect all of us in some ways. Now we move to our next section, which is on flash talks by researchers, policy researchers from Centers for Policy Research and other associated institutes in India, and also from Spru and TIP Consortium. So we had this group of 5 flash talks yesterday. We are going to follow the same format today again. And again, the format is same as I mentioned. So each talk is for 5 minutes. And after, when it's 1 minute is left, I'll intervene and remind the speaker to finish fast. And I also request all the audience to leave their questions in the chat box, and maybe speakers after their talks can also engage with in the conversation there. If the time allows, we'll also have some questions after all the 5 talks are finished. Okay. With that, I invite our first speaker, Dr. Suchiraditya Bhattacharya, a senior policy fellow at DST Center for Policy Research at IIT Delhi, to give her talk. Floor is yours, Suchi. Would you like me to share your presentation?
Yes, Suresh, that would be much helpful. Thank you.
Yes, your time starts now. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Suresh. And thanks for sharing the screen. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm Sucharita Bhattacharjee. I'm a senior policy fellow hosted at IIT Delhi. My specialization is in agricultural extension, and my research interests are in agricultural innovation systems and ICTs for agricultural development. So today I'll be talking about the research that I'll be taking up in this fellowship in the next 2 years. Next, please. Next slide, please. Suresh, can you not get? Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So the previous one, sorry. So food and agriculture systems are critical to achieving the sustainable development goals. They're also both part of the problem and solution to one of our major ongoing crises, that's climate change. India, as you can see in this slide, next slide, Suresh. So India has been actually quite proactive. Yeah, thanks. So India actually has been quite proactive in designing and implementing policies and programs to tackle this challenge. For an emerging economy, India's NDC under the Paris Agreement is also actually quite ambitious, to say. So among all the steps, one of the major initiatives that has been taken by the country is the National Action Plan for Climate Change. So it has some 8 mission mode programs under it, and they are implemented at focusing at different sectors, and they are being implemented by different ministries. And another important initiative has been the National Initiative on Climate Resilient Agriculture, that's specifically focusing on the agriculture sector. And this is being implemented by Indian Council of Agricultural Research and funded by Ministry of Agriculture. Next slide, please. Yeah, thanks. So dealing with the challenge of climate change, excuse me, actually require strengthening of existing capacities, but also it needs opening up spaces and creating opportunities for new ones. This is very much necessary for food system transformation specifically, and to include concepts like digitalization, circular economy, promote nutrition sensitive agriculture, etc. So there are multiple ways of food system transformation, especially in the global south, that has been identified by the CCFS program of CGIR. The initiatives of National Mission on Agriculture, National Mission on Sustainable Agriculture, and NICRA actually include one or more of these approaches. And so these are the two initiatives that I have chosen for my study. The initiatives actually are also, so to say, have ambidexterity, because they, while focusing on improving the current ways or the business as usual ways of doing agriculture, they are also actually focusing on transforming systems. For example, through NICRA has its district adaptation plans, and then NMSA has various components which does that. So to move ahead, the study will be guided by 3 research questions. How and by whom are these strategies operationalized within the initiatives? What are the roles of actors and human and non-human in these initiatives? And also, how do broader state, national, and international goals and policies kind of play a role in these initiatives? So basically, this is to understand the setup of the initiatives, their drivers, and also their boundaries and coherence with the broader policies and goals. For a methodological framework, I'll be using the broader agriculture innovation systems approach, but specifically the mission, the MAIS, or the Mission Oriented Agricultural Innovation Systems Framework. So this basically focuses, this was kind of initiated by combining the ideas of mission-oriented innovation policy with innovation systems perspective. And this basically has, it basically has a clear directive or a clear directionality, and also it can be looked at as a temporary innovation system where a set of stakeholders, especially policymakers, come together to kind of develop a coherent set of technological, institutional, and behavioral solutions. So as for expected outcomes, the draft STIP 2020 in its chapter 4, it says that, or it recommends that the mission mode program in agriculture with deliverables for agriculture, for technology and innovation will be implemented. So before these are actually implemented, it'll be a good exercise kind of to take stock of the existing missions or the existing mission mode initiatives in this sector, and also incorporate the learnings in the upcoming ones, and also kind of strengthen the existing ones. So that way it will kind of add on to the implementation of the STIP 2020. And yeah, so that's it from my side. Thank you, Suresh. Yeah, thank you so much. And I'll be happy to get your suggestions and comments. Thank you.
Yeah, please engage with conversation in the chat box, everyone. Thank you, Suchi, again. We now move to our next speaker, who is Dr. Alexandra Boni from Ingenio in Polytechnic University in Valencia in Spain. Over to you, Dr. Boni.
Thank you.
And you have 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if it's... Just a moment. Okay, can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay, yeah. So I'm going to share very briefly some thoughts about what we are doing in DeepSea using the formative evaluation approach to try to evaluate and monitoring transformative innovation initiatives. So our approach is based in the main principles of transformative innovation policies. I think yesterday you've heard something about that, no, from in the different intervention, but just to recap, well, the idea of directionality. So the policies should address social and environmental issues, the societal goals, the systemic level impact, and also, and this is relevant for our approach, the stress on learning and reflexivity, especially second order learning, the issue of how to deal with conflict and in this engagement, and the inclusiveness. So these are the main principles of DeepSea initiative. So from that, what we propose is an evaluation approach, a formative evaluation approach, understood as a formative and strategic dimension of a project or program or policy process. Evaluation should be informed by transformative innovation policy principles and deploy a participatory and inclusive process through which learning and capacities are developed among the participants. How to do that? Just 3 main principles. Stimulating learning and reflexivity among participants. This is very important. So when we are with this engagement, we are part of this engagement. We are not consultants. So we are part, no, we are participants, and we really engage in a co-creation process. Also using theory, because the transformative innovation policy is based on the multi-level perspective and transformative outcomes. And this theory is useful to enhance transformation and learning. And then we use a theory of change approach. So we are building a monitoring evaluation learning plan, a MEL based in a theory of change approach. I don't have time to expand those ideas, but I will be happy to answer questions through the chat. So 3 key issues that I would like to stress based in my own and my colleagues when perception and reflection when we did this kind of engagement. Mainly, we are doing at the moment 2 main engagements, one with the Vinnova, the Swedish Agency for Innovation, and another one with a project funded by Climate Kick, a European agency working on climate change. So 3 main learnings about that. First, the relevance of dedicated time to know each other. Second, the issue of intermediaries, so especially in the policy settings, and then the experimental approach. I'm going to expand these 3 ideas. Dedicate time to know each other. So it's fundamental in this kind of formative approaches to evaluation, which is really different from the summative and other approaches to evaluation, to share interests, goals, hopes in a good environment. So it's and build trust, no, around that. This is very important. This can be done along the engagement, but it's very important and it's essential to allocate time at the beginning of the process. And it's an investment. It's not a lack of time. It's not so. It's really worthwhile. No, if you are able to build trust, recognition.
1 minute. You have 1 minute.
Sorry.
1 more minute.
Okay. So it's very important to do that at the beginning. The second thought is the importance of intermediaries, no? Because we are engaging with real problems in real organization and real challenges. So what we are doing is translating the theory, no, our approaches into something understandable and useful, but that require people from the other sides that are developing the role of intermediary between us and the organization. This is really important, and organizations should devote time, no, to this kind of roles. And finally, the last thought is about the experimental disposition. So we have to be really open to innovate, to try, to fail, to learn. No? And this is important because if we are engaged in a co-creation approach, we should diminish our academic ego because we are experimenting. We are not controlling the process. We will have up and downs. So we need to adjust our expectation and manage our frustration. Also, from the other side, practitioners and policymakers should understand that we researchers don't have the magic bullet, so we don't have the solution for everything, and adjust expectation. And then we have to reflect about accountability. So we have to ask ourselves for what we must be accountable, no? For our learning, for our results. And this is part of the process. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alexandra. Now we move to our next speaker. Is Dr. Mansimran Khokhar. She is a senior scientist D at DST Center for Policy Research in Punjab University, Chandigarh in India. Over to you.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I'll just share my screen first. Sorry. Is it visible? No, not yet, I guess.
No.
Just a moment. It should be now.
Yeah, we can see it now.
All right. So thank you once again to the organizers for giving this opportunity. Warm greetings, everyone. I am Mansimran Khokhar, and I work in the domain of industry academia interactions and public-private partnerships for R&D at the Center for Policy Research at Punjab University. My brief talk today is about how we need multiple stakeholders and public-private partnerships to bring about radical changes in STI and the success factors that govern such partnerships. Now, India has recently come out with the 5th Science, Technology and Innovation Policy, which addresses working towards priority areas, and it conspicuously recognizes that STI is the driver of economic growth. But for this new policy to be more responsive towards the evolving nature of innovation, we need transformational strategies. And additionally, we need all hands to the pump to address our societal and global challenges. The present scenario in India consociates both with the concept of innovation for development as well as innovation in development. And for both cases, innovation is only going to flourish when it is facilitated through blended finances, strong frameworks, and access to vast human and infrastructural resources. So when we talk of transformational strategies, we also come to transformative partnerships. And the goal 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals encourages and recognizes the fact that involving multiple actors is crucial, and that all multidimensional innovation activities call for cross-sectoral and holistic approaches. Apart from combining the proficiencies and resources and the knowledge,
We lost
the partnership
lost your
also promise support better legal.
Seems to be some internet connection issue. Can't hear you clearly. Okay. Dr. Mansimran, maybe it's better if you turn off your you turn off your video and just
my video. Yeah.
Please.
All right. So okay, I'll just move forward. I was talking about how core and facilitating stakeholders should come together in the form of legal partnership. And now one form of legal partnership is provided by public-private partnerships, which my screen. Okay. One form of partnerships are the public-private partnerships, which provide legal structure to pool resources and gather critical mass, which of course enables a scale of effort that individual firms would not be able to achieve despite a strong funding. Through our studies at the center, there have been a few strategies that we have recognized that can be adapted to an ecosystem, which include bringing in legislative reforms that will create a more conducive environment and support partnerships, initiating clusters and consortia, setting up industrial units and the academia, and so on. However, in the interest of time, I'll rather move on to the factors that influence the success of the public-private partnerships. The first one that I'd like to talk about here is strong governance and regulatory frameworks. Say a centralized agency that looks after the governance and functioning of public-private partnership projects, and that also works towards streamlining uncertain linkages, would be one of the factors that will determine the success of a PPP. Then the second is well-defined partnerships in terms of before selecting a project and implementing it, partnerships should be defined with clear goals and timelines. The Admire program in the proposed new policy is
you have one
on the
more
lines
minute.
of establishing, is on the lines of establishing partnerships on predefined goals. Going further, I'd also like to say, adding to this point, that to bring in commitment from the private sector, a strong case of business is also a prerequisite. An example of that can be witnessed in the case of catapults of the UK, which were established on predefined goals set by industry along with the government. Moving on, structuring the partnerships in a way that they clearly define the roles and responsibilities of each of the stakeholders is also very critical. Elucidating the subject of ownership, access of IP, decision and control, is all of this goes a really long way. Then when we talk of multiple stakeholder partnerships, to enable a wide participation, it is important that each of the stakeholders is incentivized and the burden of market risk is not entirely upon a single entity, say the private sector. And obviously rewards and recognitions are very critical.
Please end soon.
Yeah, sure, but I'm just almost ending. Then ensuring funding from multiple sources and continuous evaluation and monitoring at different levels, that is ex ante, interim and ex post, can help in designing us robust projects and ventures. These are a few of the factors that condition the success of partnerships involving multiple stakeholders. I'd like to just end here, and I'd be happy to take any questions and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Coker, and please engage in conversation in the chat box.
Yes.
Next, we have here Dr. Joshua Moon, who is a research fellow at Spru, University of Sussex. Over to you, Joshua.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm Dr. Joshua Moon. I'm a member of the Harvard Sussex program here at Spru, and my main research focus is actually on epidemic preparedness and global health policy. So what I'm going to be talking about today is the lessons we can take from responding to epidemics and emergencies for STI policy. I'm going to quickly start by conceptualizing emergencies as transformative and transformations as emergencies slightly. Then I'm going to talk about evidence from lessons learned over 2 decades of global health, and then I'll end with some lessons from lessons learned in emergencies. I like to think about disasters and transformations as effectively a pair of punctuated equilibria. A disaster is, in effect, a punctuated equilibrium state where the normal, the mundane is shattered, is broken into by crisis and disaster that requires an intense amount of focus and concentration. In part, this kind of parallels this idea of punctuated equilibrium that we see in transformations and transitions and in transformative STI policy. This idea that the normal is hit by a destabilization event, by a technological discontinuity, as Scott and Giels put it. And so there's a lot we can learn from how policy is made after emergencies as to how transformations can be governed, and how our understanding of emergencies and dealing with what is effectively an era of ferment, of uncertainty, can actually give us some really good lessons. One of the important things to take from 2 decades of global health is first that crises exacerbate transparency and accountability deficits. People in an emergency mode mentality don't think about discursive or participatory approaches and immediately start to rely on their previous and inbuilt views, rather than thinking towards a more inclusive approach. We've seen this in the UK COVID response and in many Western COVID responses, which fall back on authoritarian, authoritative, centralized, and scientific decision-making rather than participatory and inclusive decision-making. Importantly, there has also been a complete lack of implementation. There is no shortage of knowledge, but there is a shortage of the implementation of that knowledge. Policy options are everywhere, particularly when it comes to emergencies, but also in transformative innovation policy. And the idea behind all of this is not necessarily that there is a shortage of thought, a shortage of priorities, but there is this fundamental difficulty of understanding which lessons to heed. Finally, interviews from my PhD highlight a number of important factors in taking lessons forward after an era of ferment, viewing instability from a position of stability. First, that there are political and economic forces that need to change before you can actually change how you respond to uncertainty. Second, that there is a need to use leadership and have a broad platform of
you have 1 more minute.
Thank you. Of communication and political input to be able to move lessons forward. And at a large scale global political level, there tends to be a reaction to problems rather than proactivity. And so being able to use those areas of ferment is important, but requires a broad coalition and a way to stop that or to pass through that overwhelming breadth of knowledge. And so in terms of lessons, the keys are emergencies like COVID are more likely to lead to a re-entrenchment of the status quo than they are to transformations. That there's no shortage of knowledge or ideas, but finding the most appropriate and most applicable is the hard part for most policymakers. And then finally, transformation, particularly after or within emergencies, needs a broad coalition with a set of core policy champions to take advantage of the era of ferment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joshua, and thanks also for sticking with the time. With our last speaker for the Flash Talk today is Dr. Soumya Pathak, who is a postdoctoral policy fellow at DST Center for Policy Research at Ambedkar University in Lucknow. Soumya, if you are here, please share your presentation. You have 5 minutes.
Yes, Suresh, thanks. I'm sharing my presentation. Just a minute. So my slides are visible?
Yes, now they are.
Very good afternoon and very good morning to all of you. I'm Soumya, working as a DST Science, Technology and Innovation Policy Postdoctoral Fellow at DST CPR Lucknow. Today I'm presenting internationalization of traditional Indian medicine, strengthening patent regime strategies and modulation of policy. So this is also a part of my work. So moving forward, that what is traditional medicine? So WHO defined traditional medicine as diverse health practices, approaches, knowledge and beliefs incorporating plant, animals or mineral-based medicine, spiritual therapies, manual techniques and exercises, which applied singularly or in combination to maintain well-being, as well as to treat, diagnose and prevent illness. So this is about the traditional system of medicine, how they converge with the allopathic system of medicine. This is used for preventive measures, curative medicines, alternative measures, and surgery. And the allopathic medicine is for the special treatment techniques, supporting measures, diagnostic techniques, and medicine. So there's a convergence between these two medicine systems. So these are the commonly used TM therapies, which is traditional medicine therapies, and therapeutic techniques, which is herbal, acupuncture, which is most commonly used, and this is from China, manual therapies, spiritual therapies also is a part of that traditional medicine therapies, and also exercises, because UN declared International Yoga Day, which is the part of our traditional medicine therapies. So here, these are the common TM therapies. And what are the challenges for the mainstreaming of the traditional system of medicine? So these are the challenges. Challenges is the mainstreaming, integration, creation of global standard for traditional medicine product, and also conformity with standards. These are the 4 different challenges which is for the globalization of our Indian standard medicine. So why traditional medicine failure at the international patent offices? This is the important issues, because there are the quality issue, processing and harvesting issues, quality control related issues, administrative issues, infrastructure related issues, and the most and foremost important, pharmacovigilance and clinical trials and R&D. So I'm focusing on pharmacovigilance, and I analyze the different country scenario with for ethnopharmacovigilance scenario. So these are the analysis of existing ethnopharmacovigilance network and its correlation with global PVs. So here is the comparative database for USA, UK, Germany, Australia, China, and India. So USA is used for governmental executive, use Federal Drug and Administration, as well as each state regulate the licensure of traditional medicine practices. UK is for UK the Medicine Control Agency, National Department of Health. For Germany, this is Federal Agency for Drug Medicinal Product. And for Australia, that is Therapeutic Good Administration, Commonwealth Department of Health is taking care. And India Steering and Monitoring Committee governed by Ministry of Ayush is governing and taking care of these committees, but execution is needed to be done. So execution part is missing for the India. Then for educational regulation, there is no standard education regulation in UK, Germany, Australia, but regulation is in China and also in India. China, 5 years university study program for pharmacists, and India, 5.5 years duration, including 1 year of internship for formal education system. And for USA also, educational regulation varies, depends on the professional licensors and scope of practice. And this is also for the selling of traditional medicine, which is in USA, which is strictly after licensing and approval.
One more minute, Soumya.
Okay, so for India is also need a formal structure because each state is independent of licensing. This is some scientometric activities which we have done with comparative Ayurvedic medicines and also Chinese medicine. We are far more back to globalize our system. So all the medicine, traditional medicine wealth depends on the medicinal plant wealth of the India, and so medicinal plant wealth is very much. Everyone knows about the medicinal plant wealth of India. So India is of 20 agroecological zone and one of the 7 mega diversity countries. About 9,000 species used for ISM and folk medicine, and there are 2,500 plant species used in codified medicine practices of India, which is there are the species which are Ayurvedic, Siddha, Sova, Rigpa, homeopathic, and Western medicine used, plant species used in this part. But the total trade for India in 2019 and 20 was only 0.36%. In 25,000 effective plant-based formulation, 2,000 tons of medicinal plant raw material required annually, and more than 1,500 herbals are sold as a herbal and dietary supplement. Only 0.36% of total trade was found. This is the comparative different state scenario of drug manufacturing units. So UP is leading in that, and also medicinal plant traders, Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh is leading. So we have done the comparative analysis of a percentage share of Ayush products. So this is the SWOT analysis. So there are the 4 mega pivots, like creating right policy incentive framework, enabling insurance and payer network, building capacity. Yes, yeah, and there are the different growth layer. So how China has achieved these because of this TCM governance. They have the well-developed TCM governance for this, and they integrated their system into their healthcare delivery. So ISM has been strongly integrated within the broad policy framework, healthcare services and delivery, in foreign policy and trade classification, as always, and education policies also. So these are the main way forward for globalization of traditional medicine. So here is about the modulation of policy and also about the traditional Indian medicine. So thank you, Suresh.
Thank you very much, Soumya, and thanks to all speakers of the class talks for really wide-ranging, covering really wide-ranging topics and giving us insights into your work. With this, we end this session and we take a short 5-minute break. After this, we'll have our breakout rooms, and we'll reconvene at 11 o'clock in the UK time and 4:30 in Indian time. So maybe stretch your legs, grab a snack or get a cup of coffee, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you. And you can leave, you can mute yourself and stop your video, and then we'll meet again in 5 minutes. Bye.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Are we all back? Or I think it takes a bit more time to get a cup of tea. If you're back, if you can turn on your camera, I'll know that you're back. Good to see you all. I guess there are a lot of people who are probably still taking a break. So I understand that it is quite a short break, but we finish in an hour. So it's also Friday, very late in the evening in India. So I apologize for that. Okay. If you are back, if you can turn on your cameras, I can see quite a lot of people turning on their camera. Okay. Okay. So it's 11:02. So let's start. Before we go into the breakout rooms, I received several requests in the chat that let's do what we did yesterday, just after coming back from the break, which is do a bit of stretching, because yeah, at least I have been sitting for the whole morning, and you have been also, those who are joining from India are also working for the whole day. So let's get up if you can. You can also, yeah, you can adjust your camera so that if you want to get up, and then do a bit of stretching. Maybe turn your head. Yeah, stretch your hands, stretch your shoulder, rotate your shoulder if you can. Keep smiling. That's always nice. Just takes 30 seconds and it definitely wakes you up. And we definitely need all of you to be woken up, because we are going to have a discussion now. This is no longer a presentation. You all have to contribute now in breakout rooms. So please wake up. Okay, I feel quite energetic. I hope everyone feels energetic. So I hand it over to Radhika, who will moderate and who will give the instructions for the breakout room discussion. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Bipashi. Definitely this little bit of stretching has added an extra energy in all of us. So a very good morning to our UK participants and a good afternoon to our Indian participants. Welcome you all for our breakout session, one of the most forward-looking session of this workshop for most of us. In this session, we will have an opportunity to actively deliberate on specific themes related to STI policy. We have 8 themes with us and all our participants are allocated to one breakout room as per their preferences mentioned in the registration. For each breakout room, we have a moderator who will set the context of a discussion and lead the deliberation. I request our moderators to appoint one rapporteur from the group who will, on the behalf of a group itself, can give a final remarks at the end of a breakout room when we all will meet again here in this platform. For information, I'll just mention names of the breakout thematic rooms and the moderators assigned for each breakout room. The first one is conceptualizing STIP in global context. That will be moderated by Diana. Then the second group is on STI policy for transformative change. That would be moderated by Imogen. Then the third one, research, innovation, and entrepreneurship, moderated by Venkat. Then STI governance, developmental context, that would be moderated by myself, Radhika. Then the fifth group is on STI roadmap for SDGs. That would be moderated by Nimita. The sixth one is on open science and science communication, moderated by Momita. The seventh one is on implementation and evaluation of STI policy, moderated by Kala. Then the eighth and the last one, inclusivity and equity in STI, to be moderated by Sandra. Those who haven't chosen any of a breakout room at the time of a registration or have registered later on, they can choose themselves and the spot where the room they want to go. They can drop a message in a chat box. Then our host, Francisco, can take care of that. So this is how we can enter into our breakout room. So we'll have around 25 to 30 minutes for the discussion. Then after our 30 minutes discussion that would be led by the moderators, they would be posing some questions to you. Then you all can debate among yourself and then you can come up with a short remark or a conclusion that a rapporteur at the end can present to all of us. So with this, Francisco, I think so like we can now move for our specific breakout rooms and then we can start with our discussion session. Then we meet after 25 minutes right back here with our rapporteurs and moderators.
Okay, is this for half an hour?
Yeah, this is for half an hour, 30 minutes.
Okay,
so
I'll open the rooms now.
For 25 minutes.
Sorry?
We can keep it for 25 minutes.
25 minutes, okay. All right, there'll be a countdown warning 2 minutes before the time's up, but this is just to let you know to wrap up your discussions rather than needing to come into the main room, and you'll be taken back automatically when the time's up. And I'll open the sessions now.
Right.
All right, so could anybody who's still in the main room at the moment who wants to go into a breakout room, you should be able to move yourself into it if by clicking on the breakout room option. That may be under the More tab on your Zoom. And then if you just click on the one that you would like to join, it should give you the option to join it. And if not, then I can move you manually.
I'll stay here for a bit with you, Francisco, until everyone moves themselves, or maybe not. But I'll stay here for a bit.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, many people have not joined any room. I request them to see this breakout room option and select the one they like.
Yeah, you can also see which rooms have less people. So maybe you want to join those rooms just to even it out.
And if you aren't able to find a setting to join, then just let me know in the chat and I can move you.
Mm-hmm. Lots of people in room 5. Oh, that's SDGs, that's why.
If you would like us to assign you to some room, we can also do that manually from here. Let us know.
Okay, I'm gonna join a room. Suresh, is that okay? You can.
Sure. Join. Have fun. See ya.
Okay. See you.
Francisco, I think one participant named Sreshta Mundal has joined the wrong room. She wants to go to the SciComm and Open Science room. Do you think that would be possible to do?
Of course. What was his name again?
Sreshta, I believe Srestha.
Sorry, I'm struggling to find which room they're currently in. Oh, was that Sweshva Mundo?
Sreshta Mundal, exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, and which group did they want to go to?
SciComm.
Cycle. So group 6, okay. Okay, yeah, but they've been moved.
Hello, everyone. So we are not yet back, all the groups.
It may be another 70 seconds or so.
Yeah, so we have 15 participants. So we wait for another 1 or 2 minutes for all of them to join back. So these 25 minutes were the fastest one in the whole workshop. Yeah, I can see the number increasing now. It's 20 now.
Yeah, people are coming back slowly.
Yeah. So Francisco, we had how many breakout rooms?
8.
Okay. So we have 53 back. I guess everyone is back here. Francisco, can you confirm me that?
Yes, the breakout rooms are all closed.
All right, all the breakout rooms are closed. Thank you, Francisco. So welcome you all back. I hope so you all had a engaging time in these breakout room deliberation on specific theme. For our breakout room, we were like 4 of us, but the time it passed like anything. So we were able to discuss on 3 major issues out of the 5 questions that I have designed for the group. We were able to do justice to 3 of them, but I'm sure you all have enjoyed this engaging session where we all debated and deliberated on specific themes. So without wasting much of time, now I'll request each moderator, the moderator who have appointed a rapporteur for their breakout room, to present the final thoughts or final remarks of what all deliberation or discussion they have. We have 2 minutes for each group, and we can start with the first group. So can I have a rapporteur from the first group that was on conceptualizing STIP global context? So Dinah was moderating that. So we can have reporter from that group. We can quickly have their...
Joshua.
Yeah.
Joshua.
Hi, that was me.
Yeah.
Okay, so we started from the 2020 STI policy for India and its kind of central principles of bottom-up, decentralized, expert-driven, and inclusive. And we started our discussion kind of thinking about whether or not expert-driven and inclusive perhaps sit in tension with one another. In particular, conceptualizations of expert-driven raises the question of how expert is defined, whether that be ministries, the general population, or kind of expert roundtables, as well as questions of the evidence basis for having an opinion, and what counts as, or what is included and therefore excluded as reliable evidence. This shifted then quickly to a discussion of inclusiveness, not necessarily as an end point of having this is an inclusive policy, but seeing inclusiveness as a core principle to process rather than an end. This for us then raised that question of how do you make a process more participatory, and how do you go from a simple view of inclusiveness as just having a wide diversity of people giving inputs to having a kind of inclusive and diverse input, a participatory and inclusive process, having the translation of that move to actually form an inclusive policy. And so having inclusiveness as a principle throughout the entire process. And then finally, we move to this question of talking about frugal innovation, self-reliance, and capacity building and empowering different constituencies to effectively act underneath an overarching STI policy and creating a policy that is supportive rather than restrictive.
Thank you so much, Joshua. So you have covered 3 different aspects that were taken up in the breakout room 1. Now I quickly move to the repertoire of our breakout number 2, STI policy for transformative change, that was moderated by Imogen. So can I have a reporter from breakout room 2?
Yes, Rupkata, are you here? I think you said you would report back, but my internet cut out at the end.
Hi.
I couldn't. Did you want to just quickly?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So, hi, I'm Rupkata, and since I do not really have much experience, oh, sorry, I'll start my video. I do not have a lot of experience in science policy, so I asked Imogen about what transformation, I mean, what exactly is transformation? How do we go there? And what is her view on the transformative change that can happen through the STIP 2020? And we were from different backgrounds in this group, 4 of us. We also had Pranav with us. He's from a tissue culture background. He's from a tissue engineering background. There was Shukriti with us, who's from a policy background. I come from an immunology background. And we all discussed on how we could take the science out of the lab and communicate it in a way so that it reaches a lot of people. And then the vaccine conversation came in, and how we have a vaccine here and we have a lot of people who are hesitant to use the vaccine. But where does this hesitant approach come from? Maybe it comes from a place where people don't really know what a clinical trial is and how the process, the science behind it is not always covered in the media very well. And often it's covered in languages like English, which leaves out a lot of people from the entire communication. So the science communication and taking it to as many people as we can through the different regional languages of India. So that, I guess, would lead to a transformation where this, for example, in this case, the hesitant approach to a vaccine would go away. So this is an example through which we discussed. It was a great discussion, but time flew by. So
Thank you so much, Roop. So I quickly move to the repertoire of 3rd group, Research, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship, that was moderated by Venkat. Can I have a reporter for 3rd group?
I'll make some remarks on behalf of the group. So the result of the discussion, we had a very spirited discussion. Myself, Rob, Janice, Mahua, Jeremy, and Somesh, 6 of us. And the joint conclusion, or the end conclusion, was India is a very interesting case where entrepreneurship, driven by individuals, leads the way both in the traditional research and innovation system, which is formal, which has a lot of competencies and a financial governance structure, a robust one going back centuries. And on the other hand, a substantial informal system which is driven completely on individual instincts. So the proposal was to have a joint center between India and the experts from Spru and the UK to study specifically the role of technologies and innovation diffusion, and more specifically the role of emerging technologies, and to create a framework on how this can be used to work with both the systems that exist, the formal as well as the informal systems. Anything if you want to add, Janice, Rob, Jeremy, Moha? Go ahead.
All right. Okay, then we quickly move to the breakout room 4. So we have 2 rapporteurs from there. Ananya, you'll have 1 minute, and Mamta, you'll have another 1 minute. Over to you, Ananya.
So we had a discussion on the STI governance, and we discussed about, we were 4 of us, me, Anya, Radhika, Mamta, and Pragya. So we will discuss about 3 points, and the points were associated with the administrative governance of STI, the research governance of STI, and the system interconnection between the industry and academia. So some of the points we discussed, I'm going to discuss 2 of them. So on the administrative governance side, in Indian perspective, we discussed on the development of a centralized platform for discussing the regional disparities and problems associated in the university arena of India, and also a discussion on financial management of the research bodies, administrative bodies related to grants and funding, and also the autonomy of the head councils of universities, where the autonomy should be there, and the council should be approachable enough for discussing the basic issues related to the administrative governance. And another point related, we discussed on system interconnections. And in system interconnection section, we focused on the industry academia connection that we lack a lot in many universities. And some of the points from that part is that the universities or the researchers, the focus should be there that there is a quote that science is global, but the technology is local. So there should be a boost of for working on local problems, so that it can create a boost to startups and many kind of local industries as well, and a directive research for the local problems, as well as there should be industries, the industries can give projects to the researchers, and the basic industry funding should be there. So there should be a bridge between industry academia to this one. So these were the 2 of the points, and over to you, Mamta. The points on research governance.
Yeah, all right. Thank you so much. Here I'm discussing the point related to innovation regulatory framework. So I just want to highlight briefly 3 or 4 points. The first point is the failure of the research work should be considered as the important part of the research, and we should appreciate the effort of the researcher. The second point I just want to address is that India is ranking at the 4th or 5th position in the research publication, but the research publication is not being converted into patent or like commercial commodity like technologies. To achieve this aspect, I think there should be a mechanism in each and every academic institution for the vetting of research publication before going into public domain, so that patentability criteria of this research publication can be checked. And third point I just want to highlight is the patent commercialization, which is a very important aspect. Because like we are filing a lot of patent in patent office, but those patents are not being converted into technologies. So according to WIPO report, that only 4 to 5% of patents are being converted into technology. So to enhance this patent commercialization ecosystem in India or any other country, there should be a dedicated cell or center in every institute, like a technology transfer cell, which can guide the researchers to convert their research into technology. And also monitoring of these cells and functioning of these cells should be done on regulatory basis. So these are the important points I just want to address. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We'll quickly move to the rapporteur or a 5th group that was moderated by Nimita. Yeah.
Sure. So I'll fill in a little bit, and Nimita can then fill in anything I missed. So we started so our group, we were talking about STI for SDGs, and we started by exploring this tension with governance. The challenge being that to achieve the SDGs, you need to kind of go across sectors and have broader impact beyond maybe the science and technology ministry. So the idea was discussed that maybe you need to have more centralized coordination and control. But then, there was some discussion that maybe it's better that there's also, because there's power in politics, you can't just centralize everything. So you need to make sure to have various levels of governance interacting with this broader goal. It was also mentioned that, for example, more resources should be put into the UN processes. UN has started doing a lot of the STI reviews, and more resources here would enable countries to see kind of the big picture and coordinate across these sectors. Then we started talking about some of the inputs that should go into this STI process, and then it came across that directionality is critical. If there's inequality to begin with, there will be inequality in implementation, so that should be like first and foremost taken into account. The digital divide is also leading to increasing inequality. Even though we might be developing digital solutions to solve inequality problems, we're actually exacerbating these inequalities. And the SDGs have also space to grow, because they need to promote possibly traditional medicine, grassroots innovation, and a lot of the issues of access to affordable technology is missing from the larger discourse. So Nimita, if I missed something, please step right in. Thanks.
Thank you, Anurag. I think you've covered all, and I've not much to add. It's just that the last point which you mentioned about, I think for Indian context, it's very important that how STI for SDGs enable us to reach to affordability, accessibility of technologies, because the whole idea is around SDGs to figure out alternate modes of technological access. So that I would say that it's very important. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nimita, thanks, Anurag. So we'll now move to the breakout room 6 that was moderated by Momita. We can have reporter of that group.
Yeah, thanks, Radhika. So in my group, the reporter was Dakshita, so she will present the discussion. Okay, Dakshita, over to you.
Thanks, Mamita. So the discussion was majorly around science communication, as science communication is a very young domain as compared to other branches of science. And we started this discussion with, so Mamita started this discussion with the question as to what we should be communicating to the people, to the general public, when it comes to communicating science. Is it just scientific discoveries, or should we also communicate the wicked problems that are going around and how science can address these problems? So majority of us think that the balanced approach is essential. Communicating scientific discoveries along with the problems that the society is facing, they should also be communicated. The another point that came forward was only one-way communication. When we think about science, communicating science to the society, it's always thought of as a one-way channel. There is an absence of an engagement per se when it comes to science communication. So if we want to really address the problems, then we need to understand the problems from public. Also, Amrita brought up this point about the existence of severe gap because of the hierarchy that exists in communication. So there is always a communicator, a science communicator, who is talking about and disseminating knowledge related to science communication. So co-creation of knowledge is very essential when it comes to science communication. Shrestha bring in a very important point, which is there is an absence of role models for people to look up to, and this is something that put a constraint in citizen science or science communication in general. There was also a point. There was also discussion around the curiosity, sense of curiosity and awareness. Okay, sure. Yeah. So curiosity is restricted because of lack of awareness around science. And then finally, we also started discussing about language as a constraint in communicating science. And that was something we took with ourselves to think about it and discuss about it further. Thanks, Radhika. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dakshita. So can we have a reporter from our 7th group that was moderated by Carla?
Hi, Radhika. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, Suchi, please.
Okay, thanks. The group, so we discussed basically on implementation and evaluation of STI policies, and the discussion started with the priority areas for SDGs in industrialized and non-industrialized countries, and how the implementation and monitoring mechanisms kind of differ. Basically, in Indian perspective, the discussion kind of moved around the Indian perspective, where it was kind of pointed out that we have kind of an incremental approach, maybe because of the limitations of resources, and so like it kind of, we tend to mobilize our resources surrounding the capacity that we have, and kind of balance it in that way. Also, like so that it can help actually handle the implementation in a balanced way. So from there, we moved on to the discussion about how the SDGs are incorporated in the recently drafted STIP 2020, and what does it mean for the implementation and follow up. So for that.
Suchi, we have lost you. So is it for me that I cannot hear you?
I can't.
You can't hear her.
Okay. Okay, so we had a few of the pointers that the group has discussed. We can move to the next group that was moderated by Sandra on inclusivity and equity in STI.
Hello.
Over to you, the reporter from the 8th breakout. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sandra.
We lost our reporter due to connections. So I'm going to do the report of the group. So our group was to discuss about equity and justice on innovation. So we start talking about what does it mean, justice and equity, and make the distinction in between justice and equity and inclusiveness, because it's not the same. And we discussed a little bit about that, about a proposal maybe from the human development and Amartya Sen approaches, understanding fairness and justice as the increase of real opportunity of people. So this was our first discussion. Then we talk about what kind of innovation could be more appropriate, to enhance equity and justice. And we spoke about grassroots innovation as a good way of approaching these justice and equity issues, not only because the innovation, the product of innovation, but also because the process and the participatory and empowering process that people that are participating in grassroots innovation are taking. Then also we discuss about the regime of innovation, particularly on the Indian regime of science, technology and innovation. And it's trying to promote inclusive innovation in some way, and frugal innovation, but in the other way is still too close for this kind of new innovation, this grassroots innovation and this really participatory way of understanding innovation. And because it's putting resources more in high-tech and market-driven innovation. And finally, one proposal that we discuss is a way of opening up regime, the Indian regime or other regimes of science and technology innovation, is exposing actors of the regime to this kind of grassroots innovations. So try to bring what is going on in these grassroots settings to the actors of regime. That's more or less all.
Thank you so much, Sandra. So imagine how many points we have got from all the breakout rooms discussions that were like done for 25 to 30 minutes. So I'm really glad that we had got so many points and we ended up in such a nice note. And I'm sure you all must have enjoyed these breakout room sessions. So now I pass this floor to Bipashi for her final closing remarks. Over to you, Bipashi.
Yeah, thank you, Radhika. I think Suresh and we will just take a few minutes and close the session. But before I speak, I think I'll give the floor to Suresh first.
Thanks a lot, Bipashi. I'll just quickly share a screen, which is to basically a thank you slide to everyone and few remarks. Let's see if it works. Can you all see the slide? Yes, so again, thank you all, everyone, for staying with us for 2 days. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, the discussions that happened over this 2 very intense days that we had of, covering wide range of topics and people from very, very different institutes coming and giving their talks and, discussing things over chat box and so on. I totally feel like I know about a lot more things now and different policy areas also that I didn't know earlier about. And we had talks from experts from all around the world, not only India and UK, and especially the flash talks were really enlightening. I would just like to quickly mention that here you see the organizing team. We have people in the organizing team from DST, CPRs and Spru. We all worked really hard to get this workshop to you. It's more than 2 months of meticulous planning. This workshop is a result of, and we really look forward to stay engaged. And we also have a follow-up meeting between Spru executive and DST officials soon right after this event ends. I would also quickly like to mention a few things about the certificates that will be also be distributed to people who participated both the days and also in the breakout sessions. We also have this networking directory that I keep on mentioning, so you can also contact people through this networking directory. There is a feedback form that has already been put on the chat box here. Please use this feedback form to give us your valuable input and feedback. We'll also send this feedback form along with an email to all of you, and we request you to also put your points there if possible. Last but not the least, we'll have a group photo in the end after Bipashi's remarks, and with that we'll end the workshop. Thank you very much for staying with us. Thanks a lot from the DST CPR side also. Now I pass the floor to Bipashi for the final thank you.
Thanks, Suresh. I'll just add a few names to the thank you list because I don't think this workshop would have been possible just by me at all. Because there's a big Spru team and a big Tipsy team who definitely wholeheartedly supported me and did and actually actively asked me if I need any help or what they can do. So that sort of support I got from the Tipsy and Spru side. So I would like to, so as you know, Pip, you all received emails from Pip. So I would like to thank Pip for helping me with the emails and all the organizations. Thanks to Francisco for setting up the Zoom and doing the very hard work of assigning everyone. We had hundreds of registrations. So Francisco had to go through one by one and assign them to breakout groups. So that was huge task. Thanks to Marian Clark, who opened today's session and also supported me and also did a lot of work from the Spru side. And Christina and Vicky are the program co-directors of Tipsy, who helped me and with a lot of things that needed to be arranged from the Tipsy side. I would like to thank May. I don't know if May is here because I asked her last minute to moderate the flash talks for me, yesterday's flash talks, and she stepped up. So thanks, May. And I would like to thank Carla, Imogen, Diana, and Sandra for moderating the breakout groups on also very last minute requests from me. And also I would like to thank the speakers in the flash talks from Spru side. So Josh, Nora, Jasmine, Imogen, and Sandra, who gave flash talks and shared their research in that session. So it was a very group endeavor, and I really personally feel very proud for getting so much support when I wanted to do this workshop. And finally, as I said also yesterday, there is a research network on this emerging theme of transformative innovation policy. So the TIP Research Network, and I personally consider all of you to be part of this network, since now we have had 2 days of discussion on transformative change and STI policy for transformative change. So I definitely want you to be part of the Transformative Innovation Policy Research Network, where together we can build a new research agenda on this transformative innovation policy. So I thank you all, and I look forward to future opportunities for similar interactions with all of you. Thanks, and I will see some of you in the executive meeting. And actually, please stay for the group photo. So please turn on your cameras if you can. And Sumit will, I think, take the photo. Okay, good. Smile at the camera.
Smile, everyone. Thanks. And again, thank you to all the speakers, all the participants. We really enjoyed interacting with you, and we hope that we really can take this thing forward and also keep on interacting on other modes. Also, hopefully there would be some joint projects, joint collaborations, joint case studies, and so on different issues that we discussed today and yesterday. So really looking forward to this, seeing it as a first step, not something that is a one-time thing, but really looking forward to build sustained institutional relations among our different institutions. So thank you very much, everyone, again, and have a good evening, have a good afternoon, and have a great weekend, and goodbye, everyone. Take care. I request the members who want to be there in the executive meeting to be joining the meeting using a separate link. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Have a great day ahead. Bye.